Choosing to go no contact with a narcissist is one of the hardest decisions a person can ever make. It's rarely just about blocking a phone number, deleting old messages, or unfollowing someone on social media. Those actions are only the visible part of a much deeper process. The real challenge lies in dismantling an entire psychological structure that developed over months or even years, a structure that kept you emotionally connected, questioning your own reality, and feeling responsible for someone else's emotional state. For many people, no contact isn't simply the end of communication, it's the end of a cycle that became deeply woven into daily life. You may have grown accustomed to waiting for their messages, anticipating their moods, explaining away hurtful behavior, or hoping that the caring version of them would eventually return for good. Even when the relationship caused pain, it often became emotionally familiar. Breaking away from that familiarity can feel unsettling, even when you know it's the healthiest choice. One of the reasons no contact feels so difficult is because narcissistic relationship dynamics often involve repeated cycles of idealization, disappointment, conflict, and reconciliation. During the positive moments, you may have experienced intense affection, validation, and hope. During the difficult periods, criticism, emotional distance, blame, or manipulation may have left you feeling confused and desperate to repair the relationship. Over time, this emotional unpredictability can make the relationship feel unusually difficult to leave because each positive interaction seems to promise that lasting change is just around the corner. When someone finally chooses no contact, many people imagine one of two extremes. They assume the narcissist either couldn't care less and immediately replaces them without a second thought, or they imagine the narcissist spending every waking moment obsessing over the relationship. Reality is usually much more complex than either picture. Initially, many narcissistic individuals focus less on the emotional loss itself and more on the sudden disruption of the relationship's established dynamic. Throughout the relationship, certain patterns may have become predictable. They knew how to regain your attention after conflict. They understood which emotional buttons produced a response. They expected that eventually communication would resume because it had happened before. No contact interrupts those expectations. Suddenly, familiar methods of restoring the previous pattern no longer work. Messages may go unanswered. Calls remain ignored. Emotional reactions they once relied upon disappear. What had been a predictable cycle becomes uncertain. For someone who has relied heavily on external validation or maintaining influence within relationships, that uncertainty can feel deeply uncomfortable. It isn't necessarily because they have suddenly developed profound emotional insight about the relationship. Rather, the situation challenges assumptions they may have held about continued access to your attention and emotional availability. This is why some narcissistic individuals make repeated attempts to re-establish contact. These attempts can take many different forms. Sometimes they appear warm, apologetic, and nostalgic. Other times they involve expressions of anger, guilt, confusion, or urgency. In some situations, they may reach out indirectly through mutual friends or create reasons that seem practical rather than emotional. The variety of approaches often reflects one central objective: determining whether the previous connection remains accessible. If communication resumes, the familiar relationship dynamic may begin re-establishing itself. If communication does not resume, they are forced to confront a situation they cannot easily influence. It's important to recognize that not every attempt to reconnect has the same motivation. Human behavior is complex, and individuals differ significantly. Some people genuinely reflect on their actions and seek meaningful personal growth. Others may primarily seek relief from discomfort, reassurance, or restoration of familiar patterns. Lasting change is demonstrated through consistent accountability and sustained behavior over time, not simply through emotional messages or temporary promises. Meanwhile, the person maintaining no contact is often experiencing an entirely different internal process. Although outsiders may assume silence means healing is complete, many people continue struggling long after communication has ended. Memories surface unexpectedly, doubts arise. They wonder whether they made the right decision or whether they were too harsh. The absence of constant conflict can even feel strangely unfamiliar because their nervous system had adapted to anticipating emotional highs and lows. This period can be especially confusing because emotional withdrawal from unhealthy relationship dynamics doesn't always feel immediately peaceful. In many cases, healing begins with discomfort. Without the constant distraction of managing another person's emotions, unresolved grief, disappointment, anger, and sadness finally have room to emerge. These emotions are not signs that no contact was a mistake. They are often part of the process of recovering from prolonged emotional stress, Over time, however, something important begins to change. Mental clarity gradually replaces confusion. The constant need to explain someone else's behavior begins to fade. Decisions become easier because they are no longer filtered through fear of another person's reaction. Confidence slowly returns as trust in your own perceptions grows stronger. Many people also notice that they regain parts of themselves they hadn't realized they had lost. Hobbies return, friendships deepen, personal goals become exciting again. Daily life becomes quieter, not because every problem disappears, but because emotional energy is no longer consumed by managing an unpredictable relationship. From the narcissist's perspective, your continued absence may eventually become increasingly difficult to ignore. The routines, conversations, and emotional patterns that once felt guaranteed are no longer available. Whether they interpret that absence with anger, curiosity, regret, frustration, or indifference varies greatly from person to person. There is no universal response because narcissistic traits exist on a spectrum, and every individual's personality and circumstances are different. What matters most is not predicting exactly what they think after no contact. That question, while understandable, can easily keep your attention focused on someone else's internal world instead of your own recovery. The more meaningful question becomes, what changes within you when you are no longer caught inside the relationship's emotional cycle? As days become weeks and weeks become months, many survivors discover that no contact was never about punishing the other person or hoping they would finally understand what they lost. It was about creating enough emotional distance to hear their own thoughts again. It was about rebuilding self-respect, strengthening boundaries, and learning that love should never require sacrificing your peace of mind. Ultimately, the greatest transformation happens quietly. The person who once waited anxiously for every message no longer checks their phone with the same urgency. The person who constantly questioned their own judgment begins trusting their instincts again. And the relationship that once seemed impossible to escape gradually becomes one chapter of life rather than the story that defines it. That is the true power of no contact, not changing the narcissist, but giving yourself the space to heal, grow, and reclaim the life that was waiting beyond the relationship all along. Every person with narcissistic traits is different, shaped by their own history and insecurities. But there's one thing that tends to hold true across the board. No contact cuts off the emotional supply they'd grown dependent on, and that disruption creates real uncertainty for them. They lose the predictability they once had. They lose their grip on influence. Most importantly, they lose the ability to steer and manage how you feel and react. That doesn't mean they miss you in any kind of healthy, genuine way, the way people who truly love each other miss one another. More often than not, what they're actually missing is what your presence gave them. The validation, the admiration, the emotional reactions, the constant availability, and that sense of control that propped up their fragile self-image. What follows is a look at 7 things a narcissist often secretly craves from you once no contact is in place. This isn't about teaching you to obsessively analyze their every move. It's about helping you understand why holding your boundaries steady is one of the most powerful forms of self-respect you can practice. One of the biggest things a narcissist quietly wants during no contact is confirmation that they still hold a meaningful place in your emotional world. This has very little to do with real love or a healthy attachment and everything to do with protecting their own sense of significance. A lot of people with pronounced narcissistic tendencies depend heavily on outside validation just to maintain their self-image. So when communication abruptly stops, they start wondering whether they've lost their grip on your thoughts, your emotions, your decisions. That uncertainty can feel almost unbearable for them because it directly threatens the story they've built about themselves as someone unforgettable, someone irreplaceable. This is exactly why you might notice certain behaviors, some subtle, some blatant, aimed at testing whether they still matter to you. Maybe it's an oddly casual text out of nowhere, a like on an old photo, a comment left on your post, a question asked to a mutual friend about how you're doing, or some engineered situation designed to get your attention. The specific method changes from person to person, but underneath it all, the motivation tends to stay the same. They want proof that they still occupy space in your emotional life. And here's the tricky part. Even a negative reaction, anger, frustration, irritation can serve as reassurance for them because it confirms they're still capable of getting under your skin. Recognizing this dynamic can protect you from misreading these gestures as evidence of real love or lasting change. Someone missing the power they once held over you is a completely different thing from someone genuinely understanding the damage they caused or taking real accountability for it. Healthy relationships aren't built on tests designed to see whether one person still has emotional access to another. They're built on mutual respect, empathy, consistent accountability, and steady, reliable behavior over time. No contact becomes such a powerful tool precisely because it shifts your focus away from constantly proving something to them and redirects it toward your own healing instead. Rather than wondering whether they still think about you, it's far more useful to ask yourself whether you're building a life that no longer hinges on their approval or their attention. As your own confidence starts to rebuild, their need for reassurance naturally becomes less and less relevant to you because your sense of worth stops depending on whether they still see your value. That shift is one of the clearest indicators that real recovery is taking hold, and that your emotional freedom is becoming stronger than any desire they have to remain at the center of your world. During no contact, a narcissist will often chase any kind of emotional reaction from you, and it genuinely doesn't matter whether that reaction is positive or negative. This can be confusing at first because most of us assume that provoking anger or sadness would only push someone further away. But for someone with strong narcissistic traits, almost any emotional response works as proof that they still have influence over you. If they can make you cry or defend yourself or argue back or explain how you feel, they'll often interpret that as evidence that the emotional connection between you two hasn't fully disappeared. This explains why some narcissists behave in ways that seem contradictory or even nonsensical from the outside. They might send a completely unexpected apology out of nowhere, drop a provocative comment somewhere they know you'll see it, spread rumors, post something clearly aimed at getting a reaction, or reach out under the pretense of needing your help with something. These moves aren't always calculated or premeditated, but they tend to serve the same underlying purpose: breaking the silence and pulling you back into some kind of emotional exchange. And once that exchange starts, the same old patterns of conflict, confusion, and manipulation can slip right back in. Learning to spot this pattern is genuinely important because it helps you tell the difference between emotional intensity and actual meaningful change. A heartfelt-sounding apology without any real consistent accountability behind it isn't enough to rebuild broken trust. Dramatic gestures, emotionally charged messages, or attempts to make you feel guilty don't automatically signal personal growth on their part. Real change only shows up over time through consistent responsibility, genuine empathy, and real respect for your boundaries, not through stirring up emotional chaos just to capture your attention. Staying committed to no contact doesn't mean pretending you don't feel anything. It means choosing not to let those feelings control your actions. You're allowed to feel angry, or grief-stricken, or disappointed without acting on any of it. Every single time you resist the urge to respond impulsively, you're strengthening your own ability to protect your peace. Over time, that urge to react starts fading naturally because your emotional energy is being reinvested into your own healing instead of being spent responding to someone who built their sense of control on your reactions. That quiet, steady self-discipline becomes one of the strongest pillars of lasting recovery. Another thing a narcissist often secretly hopes for during no contact is that you'll start second-guessing whether you made the right call. Self-doubt has a way of reopening doors that healthy boundaries had finally managed to close. So many people leaving narcissistic relationships carry around confusion, guilt, and a persistent habit of questioning themselves simply because their perceptions were challenged or dismissed for so long while they were in it. If those old doubts start creeping back in, it becomes much easier for the narcissist to regain a foothold in your life. This is why you might start noticing behaviors specifically designed to create that uncertainty. A narcissist might suddenly act unusually kind, send messages that sound thoughtful or reflective, bring up happy memories from your relationship, or suggest that things could have worked out if only you'd been a little more understanding. Other times, they'll flip the script entirely and cast themselves as the victim, implying that leaving was unfair or that you overreacted. These tactics are designed to stir up guilt, sympathy, or a sense of responsibility, and they can genuinely make you wonder whether you misread the whole situation or acted too hastily. It's worth remembering that questioning yourself doesn't automatically mean your original decision was wrong. In fact, some level of self-doubt is a completely normal part of healing from a relationship where your confidence and judgment were repeatedly undermined and dismissed. Real healing means learning to trust your own experiences and perceptions again, instead of outsourcing that trust to someone else who has repeatedly proven unreliable. Instead of asking yourself, what if they've truly changed? It's far more productive to ask what consistent, repeated patterns led you to choose no contact in the first place. Looking at the bigger picture of long-term behavior, rather than isolated bright spots, almost always gives you much clearer insight. Healthy relationships are built on repeated, consistent acts of respect, honesty, empathy, and accountability, not on temporary promises or emotionally charged appeals in the moment. As your confidence grows, you naturally become less vulnerable to manipulation rooted in uncertainty. You start making decisions grounded in your own values, your well-being, and your lived experience, rather than being driven by fear, guilt, or blind hope. That shift is one of the most meaningful markers of real recovery. The more you learn to trust yourself, the less power anyone else has to convince you that protecting your own peace was somehow a mistake. A narcissist also tends to want continued, unrestricted access to your life without ever having to earn it through the kind of accountability healthy relationships actually require. No contact takes that access away completely. And for someone who's grown accustomed to being able to reach you whenever they feel like it, losing that privilege can feel deeply destabilizing. It's not necessarily the relationship itself they miss so much as the sheer convenience of knowing they could step back into your life the moment it suited them. Losing that means losing predictability and losing influence, two things that had helped maintain their sense of control over the dynamic. This is why some narcissists try to reconnect through gestures that seem harmless or almost trivial on the surface. A simple "how have you been" text, a happy birthday message, a question about some shared responsibility, or a convenient excuse to return something you forgot at their place. On the surface, these can look thoughtful, even innocent. But in plenty of cases, they're really just a way of testing whether the door is still open, even a crack. If you respond, they'll often try to gradually reestablish the same communication patterns that existed before, usually without ever acknowledging the behavior that led to the split in the first place. It helps to really understand the difference between access and trust. Access simply means someone can reach you. Trust means they've consistently proven through honesty, empathy, accountability, and respect that they've actually earned a place in your life. A relationship doesn't become healthy again just because communication resumes. It becomes healthy when both people are genuinely willing to face past harm, take real responsibility for it, and build something better moving forward. Choosing to maintain no contact is a way of recognizing that your time, your attention, and your emotional energy are valuable and finite. You're not obligated to hand over unlimited access just because someone's asking for it. Boundaries aren't punishments or walls meant to shut people out spitefully. They're guidelines that protect your well-being and reinforce your self-respect. The longer you honor those boundaries, the more you realize your peace doesn't require keeping every door open. Sometimes the healthiest choice is simply letting a closed door stay closed, especially when reopening it would mean undoing all the progress you fought so hard to make. Another thing a narcissist tends to quietly protect during no contact is the image they've spent years carefully constructing. For a lot of people with strong narcissistic traits, how they appear to others can matter just as much as, or even more than, what's actually true. They often pour a huge amount of energy into being perceived as admirable, successful, caring, or perhaps tragically misunderstood. When someone chooses no contact, especially after living through manipulation or emotional harm, it can quietly threaten that carefully maintained public image. Even if you never say a single public word about what actually happened, your sudden absence alone can raise uncomfortable questions for them. This is exactly why some narcissists become almost obsessively focused on controlling how others perceive the end of the relationship. They might try to steer the narrative by painting themselves as the victim, suggesting you were unreasonable, overly emotional, or simply impossible to please. Others swing the opposite direction, suddenly becoming unusually charming or generous in public settings, reinforcing whatever flattering version of themselves they want people to believe. These behaviors usually have less to do with actually resolving anything between you two and much more to do with protecting their reputation and heading off any chance that people might start questioning their actions. Understanding this can help you avoid getting pulled into pointless battles over who's right and who's wrong. It's completely natural to want people to know your side of the story, especially when false information is being spread about you. But constantly defending yourself against every single accusation can drain you emotionally and, ironically, keep you tethered to the very conflict you're trying so hard to leave behind. Not every misunderstanding needs correcting, and not every opinion out there deserves a piece of your emotional energy. Protecting your own integrity is often far more valuable in the long run than trying to control someone else's version of events. Your consistent actions, your steady boundaries, and your visible personal growth will speak louder over time than any argument or attempt to convince everyone of the truth ever could. The people who genuinely know you will be able to tell the difference between authenticity and performance without needing you to spell it out. One of the most empowering realizations in this whole healing process is understanding that your worth was never determined by someone else's version of you. You don't owe anyone a lifelong campaign proving your experiences were real. Your energy can go instead toward building a peaceful, honest life where your character shows up in how you treat yourself and the people around you, not in defending yourself against someone else's carefully protected narrative. One of the deepest things a narcissist may secretly crave during no contact is regaining psychological control. And control doesn't always show up in obvious ways. It's not limited to making decisions on someone's behalf or issuing outright demands. Sometimes it looks much subtler, shaping your emotions from a distance, influencing your choices indirectly, making you question your own reality, or simply knowing that your daily mood still somehow depends on what they do or say. Once you establish and stick with no contact, that influence gradually starts fading away. For someone who relied on that sense of control to feel secure or significant, losing it can be genuinely hard for them to accept. This is why some narcissists try re-entering your life through emotionally charged, unpredictable situations. They might swing back and forth between sudden kindness and unexpected hostility, make big promises about how they've changed, or manufacture a sense of urgency designed to pressure you into responding immediately. At other times, they'll go quiet for a stretch, hoping the silence itself eventually wears you down enough that you reach out first. These behaviors can look completely different on the surface, but they usually share the same underlying purpose: testing whether they can still affect your choices and your emotional state. Recognizing this pattern lets you respond with awareness rather than pure impulse. Psychological control loses its grip every single time you make a decision rooted in your own values instead of reacting out of fear, guilt, confusion, or pressure. And it grows stronger every time you pause before responding, remind yourself exactly why you chose no contact in the first place, and prioritize your own emotional well-being over resolving someone else's discomfort. Healthy relationships were never built on one person controlling another. They're built on mutual respect, honest communication, real trust, and the freedom for both people to express themselves without fear of manipulation. If staying in contact keeps producing anxiety, self-doubt, or emotional instability for you, it's absolutely worth asking whether that connection is actually supporting your well-being or simply keeping you trapped in an unhealthy loop. The longer you hold on to healthy boundaries, the more you start to realize that true strength was never about controlling someone else or winning some kind of power struggle. It's found in governing your own choices, protecting your own peace, and refusing to give up your emotional independence. That quiet, steady confidence is something no manipulation tactic can easily strip away from you, and it marks a real, meaningful step toward lasting healing and genuine freedom. Perhaps one of the hardest things for a narcissist to sit with during no contact is watching you continue to grow and thrive without them. In a lot of unhealthy relationships, a narcissist comes to expect that your confidence, your happiness, and your sense of identity will remain tied to their presence in your life. So when you actually start healing, building new routines, strengthening your self-esteem, and creating a life that no longer revolves around them, it directly challenges that expectation. Your progress becomes living proof that you were fully capable of moving forward on your own, without them at the center of everything. This is exactly why some narcissists tend to resurface right around the time you seem to be doing genuinely well. They might reach out after months of complete silence, offer congratulations on some achievement, bring up nostalgic memories from the relationship, or express a sudden, surprising interest in reconnecting. These actions aren't always driven by the exact same motivation every time, but they often reflect a shared discomfort with the idea that you're no longer emotionally dependent on them. Your independence is a constant reminder to them that whatever influence they once had is no longer guaranteed or automatic. It's important to remember that real personal growth was never about proving someone wrong or making them regret losing you. If your healing process starts centering around their reaction to it, they're still occupying a significant amount of space in your emotional world. Genuine recovery happens when your motivation shifts away from chasing validation, revenge, or recognition and moves toward building a genuinely healthier, more fulfilling life just for yourself. Your success was never something that needed to be witnessed or acknowledged by the person who hurt you in order to actually count. Every single step you take toward emotional health chips away at old patterns built on fear, guilt, and self-doubt. Slowly, you start investing your energy into supportive relationships, meaningful goals, and activities that reinforce your own sense of purpose. Over time, your identity becomes rooted firmly in your own values, rather than in someone else's approval or criticism. The greatest outcome of going no contact was never about the narcissist noticing your transformation. It's about you noticing it. Waking up feeling lighter, more confident, and more at peace than you ever thought possible, that's the real measure of healing. When your happiness stops being tied to whether someone comes back, apologizes, or finally changes, you've reclaimed something far more valuable than the relationship itself ever was. You've reclaimed your own life.